What's up, everybody? Welcome to System Crafters Live. I'm David Wilson, and we're back with another Friday stream where we get together as a community and talk about whatever topic I've come up with for the week, and this week is no exception. Hello to those of you who are in the chat so far. Summer, GK Pseudo, Chris, Cow 2001. Yes, another voiceover session for Summer is starting now. GK Pseudo says, "Hope you're feeling better, Dave." I don't know what happened to me. Did something happen? Yeah, I was sick a few weeks ago, but thankfully that's all over now. Hello to Dave Thompson. Nice to see you. Hello to Thomas Gunn. All right. Let me get everything pulled up here. Okay. Yeah, almost had a little bit of technical trouble before the stream started. May still have technical trouble. We'll see what happens, but so long as I don't bump the desk or bump the other laptop, we should be fine. As usual, the USB-C jack on this laptop is super finicky, so I have to be very careful not to touch it the wrong way, otherwise it will smite me. GK Suda says, "Can the IRC chatters see us from YouTube chat?" Yes. Hey, Menacing Mecha, nice to see you. Menacing Mecha says, "Big fan of Fennel, though haven't done anything with it yet." Yeah, I haven't done anything with it yet either. That's why I kind of wanted to take a look at it today to get a sense for how useful it might be. Gun says, "Fully charged." Yeah, that's a good point. Let me double check that, actually. It seems to be online and fully charged. This time, we should be okay. I'm plugged into the right jack this time. Hello to Kayevsky7. And to Salutis. Let me see. Let me bump the zoom of this up a little bit so I can read it. Okay. That's cool. Saluti says, "Using Fennel professionally at work. I'd be interested to hear what is what you're using it for." Maybe, did we talk about this last stream? Chris says, "David is jacked." You mean from a caffeine perspective? Also from a, what you call it, anxiety perspective, just because, you know, last minute trying to get things figured out before the stream. Okay. GK Suda says, "What is your battery percentage on today?" It's 100. It's only 100. And it appears to still, well, it says 99% load, so we may have some fun. We'll see. Gotta get a new computer. That's right, Salutis. We did talk about it. We use Fennel for mobile games. That's great. Chris says, "I meant from a USB-C perspective." Yes, we won't be jacked for very long because it will be broken. So, yeah, we'll talk about Fennel in a little bit, but I think it's going to be a pretty interesting topic because it's something I've been wanting to look into for a while, but I haven't gotten to it. Today, for updates, I don't really have anything. I'm trying to think if anything interesting happened this week, but I've been kind of like half checked out. I'm still recovering mentally from 2 weeks of holiday time. Okay, so Summer's screenplay appears to have finished in the chat. Thank you, Summer, for the highly creative vignette, I guess you could call it. Let's see, what's happened? Nothing really has happened. Oh, by the way, Happy New Year. It's now 2024. This will be... Well, I started streaming at the end of 2020, so this will be the 4th calendar year that I've been working on System Crafters and the System Crafters channel, which is pretty cool. But definitely not the 4th year that I've been doing System Crafters. Yeah, we talked about sort of what I had in mind for the year last week, the kinds of things that I want to look into, accomplish, etc. So if you missed that stream, definitely check that out if you want to. But yeah, I mean, this stream today will be the first in another series of streams for the year that will, you know, start investigating something that's cool and possibly useful for you as a system crafter or just as a computer enthusiast, language enthusiast. Hello to Ashraz. I see Ashraz joining the chat. So yeah, updates. There's really nothing specific. Anybody think of anything that happened this week? Gun says, "Eventually fired up Crafted Emacs to join the chat." That's cool. Yeah, so probably there's nothing worth talking about. So I think updates are just a lonely tumbleweed barren landscape at this point. I have been playing a lot of Call of Duty, so that's something that's been happening. Okay, so today I want to take a look at an interesting language called Fennel. Fennel is a Clojure-inspired Lisp language that compiles down to Lua. Now that probably, for some of you, might sound like something confusing or overkill, but I think it might be something that has some value to some of you out there who might use tools that use Lua as a configuration language, or maybe just want to try something different. So to talk about Fennel, we kind of need to talk about Lua. So what I wanted to do first is start with Lua, take a look at what that is, maybe just get kind of a high-level understanding of what that language looks like, what it provides, etc. And then we can get into Fennel and try it out. Because Fennel is included in the Geeks package repository, but I believe it's included in many Linux distribution package repositories. Plus, it's very easy to install on any system, really, just because it is used straight out of Lua runtime. So I saw something in the chat that distracted me for a second. All right, so first let's look at Lua, but I've kind of written my own little blurb here. It's a lightweight, embeddable scripting language for applications, games, and more. And it's meant to be really easy to integrate into any existing application to make configuration and scripting possible, or basically extend a program with additional functionality. So if you think of Emacs as a text editor, it has an extension language called Emacs Lisp, and it's all built together. It's sort of like, it is a program that is meant to be configured and extended using the Emacs Lisp language. Lua, on the other hand, is a language that's intended to provide similar capabilities. You have a language that can be executed dynamically at runtime to affect the behavior of the program. You can reevaluate functions, I think, and pretty much do general purpose programming. So you could plug this into any C, C++ application, or really any other programming language application. So if you are a programmer and you want a way to allow people to extend your program with additional functionality, or maybe just have a configuration script, you could plug in Lua. Apparently it's pretty easy to do. I haven't personally done it before, but given that I have a bit of experience plugging in language interpreters into programs, I imagine it's going to be pretty easy to do that. We won't do that today, but we will just sort of take a look at what Lua is at a high level. So the Lua homepage gives us a little bit of information here. The About page says it's a powerful, efficient, lightweight, embeddable scripting language, supports procedural programming, object-oriented programming, functional programming, data-driven programming, and data description. So apparently it's capable of doing quite a number of different things. It combines simple procedural syntax with powerful data description and constructs based on associative arrays and extensible semantics. So it's also dynamically typed. So basically it's supposed to be a super flexible and extensible language, which is good if it's meant to be an extension language for programs, because you want to be able to add additional functionality to it. It also has the kind of things you need, like the data types and stuff that you would need for non-trivial coding. Associative arrays, or basically like a dictionary or a hash map, those are pretty useful for lots of programming tasks. So I think that Lua depends on those pretty heavily. Let's see, anything else? Yeah, here it is. Why choose Lua? It's a proven, robust language. This is actually kind of an interesting selling point of Lua. It's been around for a long time. Does it say here what year it was created? Creation in 1993, but it's actually been integrated in quite a few programs, game engines, all types of different applications. The leading scripting language in games, it says here. So this is a battle-tested language and runtime that people have used for a lot of different purposes. So if there's, a program you have that you're writing, or that maybe that you want to help contribute to, and you want to get, extensibility in there, Lua is one option you could pick, and it would probably be pretty good for that. Lua has a deserved reputation for performance. So basically, it's one of the fastest scripting languages, at least according to their benchmarks. I think a lot of that has to do with the way that the language is designed, but also the fact that it has this Luakit, which is a just-in-time compiler for the Lua, I guess, bytecode VM to native code on the machine. So I don't know if that's something that comes with it or if you have to install it separately, but apparently it is possible to basically turn Lua code into native code at runtime. It's not like compiling a C program. It's a little bit more heavyweight than that, but still it can be a lot faster than interpreting things at runtime. Lua is portable. It's distributed in a small package and builds out of the box in all platforms that have a standard C compiler. That's a pretty big advantage because there's effectively a C compiler for everything out there. Mobile devices, embedded systems, et cetera, et cetera. I wonder what standard of the C, well, what C standard it targets, though. That would be pretty interesting. It's embeddable. It's a fast language, small footprint that you can embed easily into your application, blah, 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 blah. So you can basically plug it into any other program and written in any language in many ways. Fundamental concept and design of Lua is to provide meta mechanisms for implementing features instead of providing a host of features directly in the language. Sounds kind of like Scheme to me, or Lisp in general. So maybe it already does lean towards Lispy style, even though it's not a Lisp specifically. Let's see. It's not a pure object-oriented language, but it does provide meta mechanisms for implementing classes and inheritance. They bring an economy of concepts and keep the language small. That's a big advantage whenever you have an interpreted language that's meant to be fast. If you can keep the language features sort of constrained to a subset of what the language is possible to do, then it's easier to translate that into efficient code that can run on a bytecode interpreter or even be compiled down to native code at runtime using a JIT compiler. And that's kind of what Scheme does also. Scheme has a very sort of simple core, which a lot of things can be built on top with syntaxes and macros, etc. So, I like the fact that there's some similarity there. Lua is small. Adding it to an application does not bloat it. Ooh, that scary bloat word. Let's see. It's 1.4 megabytes uncompressed. The source code and documentation. The source contains around 30,000 lines of C, which is not that bad. Let's see. On 64-bit Linux, the interpreter built with standard libraries takes 282K, and the library takes 470K. So it's basically under a megabyte included in an application, which is cool. It's great. It's using the MIT license, so you can pretty much plug it into anything. So that's basically Lua. Let me see. Is there like a showcase of what the language looks like? I remember when I've seen the language before. Oh yeah. Also worth noting that you can configure NeoVim with Lua. That's one of the languages for NeoVim. So if you follow the sort of trail of what we're going to do today, you could conceivably configure NeoVim with Fennel as Lisp syntax. So if you wanted to have a Emacsy style configuration in NeoVim, you could use Fennel for that via Lua. I know people do that, so it is possible. Let me see. Where is... We got some docs. Get started. Show me some examples. Documentation page. Lua examples. Just show me some examples. I want to see what the code looks like. Programming in Lua. Okay, complete examples. That's not Lua, I don't think. Okay. Yeah, pretty simple syntax, it seems. Is this right? Yeah, function, fwrite, parameter list. It kind of gives me a bit of a Pascal vibe, I think. If I'm remembering the name of the language correctly. By the way, RIP Niklas Wirth, who was the creator of Pascal. I think he passed this week. Let's see, programming Lua 1. Yeah, so super simple. I mean, it kind of looks a bit like Python or any other kind of block scoped language like this. Let me see. Let me get back to the checks. I think a lot of people have been telling me stuff here that I've been missing. Ashra says, wasn't Fennel something that Eric was a fan of? Yes, I've seen Eric around a little bit. He shows up in the IRC. Dave says, I've integrated Lua like 10 years ago and it's pretty easy. Ashra says the World of Warcraft add-ons are wild. I didn't know you could do World of Warcraft add-ons in Lua. That's pretty cool. Saluti says, like Scheme, Lua is minimalist. Nice. Dave says Luakit is a separate implementation. Cool. Dave says there's a similar ethos between Lua and Scheme, though of course I find Scheme to have the more solid language design. Yeah. And Saluti says, but in a more practical way than Scheme. Yeah, Scheme is definitely trying to be like a more faithful lambda calculus based language, where Lua is probably just trying to be super practical, which, you know, is good in its own way. Gunn says Lua is Portuguese for moon, right? Yeah, I think it translates to moon from one of the languages. Let's see. Gunn says there seems to be another Lisp Lua implementation called Earn. Cool. Salute says, in fact, there's more Fennel users on Vim than on Emacs. That's interesting. Dave says, my favorite feature of Lua is that it's basically OCAP safe by default, kind of like WebAssembly. That's interesting. I didn't know that was possible. You may have to explain that to me a bit more. Salute says, structural programming is the term instead of block scoped language. Okay, thanks. Let's see. Ashra says, in World of Warcraft, the in-game HUD used Lua and Blizzard had that API open for modders. That sounds insane to do. I did see a roommate of mine use some of those total UI overhauls. It was pretty nuts. Dave says, the other difference between Scheme and Lua is that Lua is very much tied to a particular implementation in people's minds. Yes. There is the standard Lua implementation, plus maybe the couple others that are for performance, like Luakit. And also there's, is it Fengari? Fegari. Which is a Lua VM that's written in JavaScript. So if you want to run Lua in the browser, including Fennel, you can use Fengari. Fegari. Because Fegari is moon in Greek. There you go, Fengari. So, yeah, anyway. Okay, so Dave says, regarding OCAP, the Lua library does not come with any I/O access. You have to add it in, as in grant the capability. That's cool. Okay, so back to this page. Let me just go real quick back. I think that's basically it, right? Like, we don't really need to go further in depth at the moment on what Lua is or how to use it or what it all means. So let's look at Fennel, because that's what we're here to talk about today. So this says that Fennel is a programming language that brings together the simplicity, speed, and reach of Lua with the flexibility of a Lisp syntax and macro system. And if that link there it piques your curiosity, it just goes straight to the Wikipedia page for Lisp, which is a little bit of a letdown, I guess. The bullet points here: full Lua compatibility. You can call any Lua function or library. Zero overhead. Compiled code should just be as efficient as handwritten Lua. So that must mean that they are condensing down all of the Fennel code patterns to pretty raw Lua's constructs without a lot of extra stuff around it. We might have to look at some of the output and see what it looks like. Compile time macros ship compiled code with no runtime dependency on Fennel. So it sounds like you can do the macro expansion pass separately from the interpretation pass, so that you can have the all the macro code in your file precompiled, which I'm guessing is the case anyway, because you are transpiling Fennel to Lua. You're basically taking Fennel code and you're turning it into Lua code. So you, by definition, you're already going to be doing macro expansion. So, I mean, I don't know that it really gives you anything special. It's just sort of the nature of how transcompilation works. Embeddable Fennel is a one file library as well as an executable. That's pretty nice if you are trying to pull in Fennel to a program that supports Lua. You don't have to have like a weird, really complicated setup for getting Fennel integrated. You just pull in a library that's one file, which you can probably just check into your repository, your project repository, and then load that up. It also comes as an executable, probably just for your convenience. Embedded in other programs to support runtime extensibility and interactive development, which sounds like it might have a REPL, which would be pretty cool. I'm guessing Lua also has a REPL. Okay. So maybe Lua itself doesn't have a REPL, but there's libraries that provide REPL functionality, like this one. And apparently there's a package manager called Lua Rocks. Is that right? Lua package manager. Okay, cool. So that might be one way to do all this stuff. All right. So anywhere you can run Lua code, you can run Fennel code. So that means game libraries or engines like Love2D, which I haven't used, but I do see a lot of people using that for game jams. So it must be pretty easy to get started with. You can use that with Fennel. I know that Phil Hagelberg, otherwise known as Technomancy, has done a few game jams with Fennel plus Love. I know other people also have been doing the Lisp game jam with that. So people have been using it for that purpose, which is cool. There's also the TIC80, which is a tiny computer which runs on WebAssembly, I believe. Kind of a cute little thing you can use for doing retro-style game development on a minimal imaginary system, I guess. It's imaginary. And you can target this with Fennel. So if you want to write some cool retro games with a Lisp language, you could do that with Fennel. Window managers like AwesomeWM. We might try this later if we have time. Like I could try to load up AwesomeWM and maybe try to pull Fennel into that and try to configure it a little bit. I don't know how well it will work. I personally haven't used AwesomeWM very much, but I know that a lot of people like it. So, you know, it's worth knowing about if you want to try different window managers and want one that could be Lisp configurable, even though it really doesn't, you know, it's not designed for that necessarily. Let's see. Dave says, it's why running Love2D games is relatively safe. The file system is virtualized. I like that. Ashra says, TIC80 reminds me of Pico 8. Yeah. Saluti says, the key term there is with no runtime dependency on Fennel. This is very important. Fennel has no runtime. That is pretty cool. There are no functions, no standard library, etc. In other words, Fennel does not exist at runtime. That's why the language looks like it does. That's cool. I'm interested to see the implications of what you just said. Leroy says, what window manager are you using? I'm using Sway. Christian says, Roblox uses Lua or a very similar fork. That's cool. Judy says, hey, Judy. So essentially like TypeScript, essentially transpiling to JavaScript. Yes, exactly. Mjolnir says, hey, Mjolnir. When I heard TIC80, I thought Trash 80. Yeah, not exactly the same. Probably the TIC80 is more capable than a TRS-80. I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. All right. Also, web servers, there's a couple. I've never seen these before, I don't think. Databases like Redis and PostgreSQL. Web browsers like Luakit or... Oh, yeah, I think this Fengari is the browser VM. But Luakit is a kind of like a hacker's browser. Similar to Qt browser, probably came before Qt browser. I'm not exactly sure, but it is configurable using Lua. It's also keyboard driven. I don't know if it was one of the first that did this sort of link navigation model where you have these prefixes that you just type on the keyboard to navigate the links. Maybe others did it before. I don't know, but Luakit has been around for a while. So you can configure this browser with Fennel also. And cheap microcontrollers, I don't know what this is, but apparently there's a microcontroller that can interpret Lua almost directly, and then you can use Fennel to write code for that. So that's pretty cool. There's also a web REPL, which is using the Fengari runtime, and you can just type in code here and evaluate it directly in the browser. You can also probably look at the Lua code that comes out of it too. So very easy to get started with, sounds like. Also has quite a lot of applications. So it feels like a worthy language to be looking at because you might find some ways that you can use it for personal projects or for your system crafting purposes, etc. Let's see. Gunn says, quote from Andre Garcia, while Fennel is Lua in Lisp close, Earn is more into the Lisp family, being influenced by Common Lisp and Clojure. So my guess is the implication of that statement is that Fennel is kind of like a alternative syntax for Lua, and Erlang.com is more of a Lisp implementation. Okay, it literally says that, Lisp implementation for Lua. Which implies it has probably a lot more of a runtime layer and libraries that are needed to execute correctly. Judy says, DaVinci Resolve also has a Lua interpreter plus API. Well, that's pretty cool. DaVinci's cool. Redacted says, Luakit development doesn't look very active, which might be a problem for a browser. Yeah, I also saw that too. Dave says, based on those descriptions, Fennel sounds more interesting to me than Earn. Well, if you are a game developer and you want to have the performance characteristics of Lua without like any sort of layer on top of that add to the slowness, then I'm not saying it's slow up, that weigh down the execution time, I guess, then Fennel is probably better. All right. So interesting to look at the rationale page they have. So is a programming language that runs on the Lua runtime. Let's see. The conceptual simplicity of Lua stands in stark contrast to other easy-to-learn languages like JavaScript or Python. Lua contains very close to the minimum number of ideas you need to get the job done. Only Forth and Scheme offer a comparable simplicity. That definitely interests me. When you combine this meticulous simplicity with the emphasis on making programs reprogrammable, the result is a powerful antidote to prevailing trends in technology of treating programs as black boxes out of control of the user. So to simplify that, I think what they're saying is that it gives you tools to, Lua is something that would give users more control over their programs and the ability to extend them themselves, which is kind of what Emacs is all about and kind of what free software is all about as well. So if Lua is so great, why not use Lua? So Fennel runs on Lua. The runtime semantics of Fennel are a subset of Lua's, but you can think of Fennel as an alternate notation you can use to write Lua programs, which helps you avoid common pitfalls. So basically they are designing the language in a way to keep you away from the sharp edges of Lua the language. Allows Fennel to focus on doing one thing very well and not get dragged down with things like implementing a virtual machine, standard library, profilers, or debuggers. That is kind of a powerful concept for anybody who has an idea for their own language, like a way to write programs that might be better for a certain set of use cases, or maybe just like aesthetically better to your taste or whatever you like. Instead of trying to write like a whole compiler from scratch, which I've tried to do, and it takes a lot of time, a better thing to do might be to just write a transpiler that converts the code in your language to another existing compiler or runtime so that you can benefit from the strength of the platform. And Fennel is basically betting on the stability and reach of Lua, the platform, and is just providing a better language front end for that, which I think is a good idea. Any library or tool that already works for Lua will work just as well for Fennel. It's also an important implication of the fact that Fennel does not introduce it. Well, I haven't seen it yet, but everything that they're telling me so far and what Saluti said in the chat is saying that Fennel doesn't introduce any of its own language semantics that are outside of what Lua already does, which means that you can just call directly into Lua libraries. You don't have to have any kind of weird foreign function interface or weird like registration of mappings between Fennel functions to Lua functions, etc. You should be able to just get started and call things directly. So you don't really have to worry too much about things not working. They should just work. The most obvious difference between Lua and Fennel is the parens first syntax, parenthesis first syntax. Fennel belongs to the Lisp family of programming languages. You could say this removes complexity from the grammar. More regular, has fewer edge cases. Simply by virtue of being a Lisp, Fennel removes from Lua statements, operator precedence, early returns. So it turns it into an expression-based language that is, what is it? Prefix notation, where all the operators come first in the call signatures. Anyway, okay, I'm not going to read through this whole thing. You can read this yourself if you want to. But it's useful information, I think, if you're interested in this project, you want to learn more about why they did it. That's cool. They have a Lua primer. I didn't see that the last time I looked at this. We won't look at this too in depth. I just want to see sort of what... okay, so they're giving you examples of Lua code written in Fennel. Cool. I saw something interesting here. Coroutines. Coroutine basics. So they do have coroutines aren't necessarily continuations. I guess a coroutine is probably a subset of continuations, but it's effectively a concurrent execution thread that is not necessarily parallel. So it gives you the ability to do asynchronous looking code. And you can resume coroutines. Yeah. So you could effectively write an asynchronous event loop with this. Anyway, let's not get into the weeds on that. Let's check the chat real quick. Leroy says, can you configure Emacs with Fennel? No, because Emacs doesn't use Lua for configuration. Judy says, I wonder how much of the Lisp experience Fennel can bring without runtime support. Well, I think it's mostly about syntax and macros, which is what the Lisp edge here is. They say they have forms, and these forms might be like special forms in Lisp parlance, where you have a particular structure of an expression that could be rolled out into some other, what's like a macro effectively, but a special form usually is like implemented in the compiler itself and not really a macro. But between special forms and macros in this language, it probably just unrolls down to normal Lua code without having any extra like library or runtime mechanics. Dave says, implementing a whole Lisp system by compiling to another high-level language rather than some kind of IR or C is not something I'm into. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, yeah, if you're doing like a whole implementation, it would be kind of a pain in the ass, for sure. Tree Blast says, Fennel just wrapped up some talks at FennelConf 2023, worth checking out. There's a fun Playdate talk. That's a good intro. Thanks. I didn't know they had their own conference. Raycat Whodat says, Fennel is impressive to me for two reasons. One, the generated Lua outside of mangled names is about what I'd write by hand. And two, there's still a Lua escape hatch. Okay, cool. So there's probably places where you can like inject raw Lua code. Also, the language is so good that there are Fennel devs who don't know Lua, which I find very funny. Well, I mean, it's probably fine, right? If you are constraining the type of code you're writing to what Fennel allows you to do, then it's basically a subset of Lua the language anyway. Like, you don't need all of the extra stuff that's in Lua the language. So maybe you don't really need to know all about Lua. Let's see. Trev says, trading Lua's tables for Lisp-S expression seems pretty good. Lua is really easy for making configurations, though. I haven't really tried that, but maybe we'll see some examples. Okay. Saluti says, Saluti is raising their hand as a Fennel developer who virtually never wrote any Lua. Okay, so setup guide. Let's try to get this thing running, eh? Downloading Fennel using a package manager. There's also a script that you can use to download, I'm guessing, a precompiled runtime for Fennel and put it on your system. A lot of people don't like doing that, like running some random script on the internet. It's even a Lua script. Wait, hold on. This is the Fennel script. I see. So you need to have Fennel installed. So this is not a bash script that installs Fennel. This is Fennel itself. All the code for Fennel, it seems. I'm guessing. I mean, this must be right? And then it's using user bin env Lua. So you must have Lua installed already, and then you could just download this and run it directly, apparently. You can rename the script to Fennel for convenience, blah, blah, blah. Oh, and that's kind of an interesting implication here. Or you can leave the version in the name, which makes it easy to keep many versions of Fennel installed at once. Because Fennel is just a script, you could have all the versions of Fennel on your system at the same time without installing programs if you wanted. Downloading a Fennel binary allows you to run Fennel on your computer, blah, blah, blah. You can download binaries here for Windows and Linux. I'm sure this works on Mac OS just the same. They just don't provide pre-made binaries for that. So if you just have Lua, you can run the script. Fennel code can be embedded inside of applications that support Lua either by including the Fennel compiler inside of the application or by performing ahead of time compilation. So you can have a build step for your program to turn it into plain Lua code and then embed that into your application. Embedding Fennel in a program that doesn't already support Lua is possible, but outside the scope of this document. That sounds kind of strange. Is that with Luakit? I wonder. Who knows? Embedding the Fennel compiler is a more flexible option and is recommended. By embedding the compiler, users can write their own extension scripts in Fennel to interact with the application, and you can reload during development. That's pretty cool. There are so many ways to distribute your code. We won't cover them all here. Please see the wiki page on distribution. I'm curious what that's going to include. Okay, sure. Running from source, simple scripts, binary executable. If you want to distribute something that works on systems that don't already have Lua, you can compile a binary that includes Lua along with your program using the compile binary flag. That's pretty sweet because it means that you can have a Fennel program that you compile down to a binary, which is basically just taking the Lua interpreter and your Fennel code, just bundling it together in a binary, and you can just distribute it, which is fine, I think. Compile binary method can also be used to distribute standalone programs that use C libraries, but it's more complicated and doesn't always work. Yes, that's for advanced users, please. Let's see, Love 2D, yes, Lua rocks. All right, so that's not too much. Cool, so what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna pop over into vterm and geeks shell Fennel. We'll see how long this takes to install. I know that Geeks has Fennel, so we're just gonna let it do its thing. It has 1.3.1. I think the latest must be 1.4.0. That's okay though. I don't think we really need the latest version, so we'll just go with that. If I type Fennel, it gives me a REPL, which is cool. I'll type comma help to see available commands. So pretty typical REPL commands for a Lisp interpreter implementation. Reset all REPL local scope. A help message compiles the expression into Lua and prints the result. Well, that's cool. Let's see. Give me not the primer tutorial. Let's just take a quick look. Functions and lambdas. So this is a function definition in Fennel. Fn, then the name of the function, the parameter list that has square brackets. Now, if you're used to Emacs Lisp, Common Lisp, or Scheme, this will look kind of weird to you. But if you've ever used Clojure before, this probably looks pretty familiar. So let's see. I'm just going to make a simple function with this compile here. Fn foo. Empty parameter list, or maybe just a single parameter, then I'm just going to return that parameter back. So that turns into local function foo with x parameter, return x end. And then it returns foo, which is interesting. I wonder if this like, is that because the REPL may be inserting the return at the end so that it comes back out in the eval step, I wonder? So fn foo x. So we got the function. I like the fact that it looks like a scheme print. And then we're just going to call foo5 or even foo. Cool. So it works basically like you would expect it to. It's an expression-based language, so you just return whatever the last thing evaluated in the function is, it gets returned. Let me stop for a second and make sure I'm up to date on the chat. Ashra says, time to MetaX package install Lua mode and Fennel mode. Yeah, I'll definitely need to install Fennel mode. Adam says, Clojure is a related project, but the developer has figured out a config approach with Fennel that enables him to leverage Fennel in his NVim config. I think I heard that. Like, Clojure was going on for a bit, and then maybe it like switched to be using Fennel instead. Ashras has a good point. What about symbols? So foo symbols don't work. I think though that keywords keyword syntax works, because that probably gets turned into what Lua uses for keys for tables. I don't know though. I'm just like guessing a little bit here. Raycat Whodad says colons. Yeah, so that's what I expected, because I have seen a lot of colons being used in this stuff. Okay, so you can get doc strings for things using the doc command, which is cool. Let's just follow this. Can I make this dark mode? What if I do that? Kind of want this to be a bit wider, but that's okay. Is it still readable? Is there not a dark mode for this website? I should have dark mode turned on. Ashra says the compiler error already tells the important part for me. You can use symbols at compile time in macros. Yes. Try moving this inside of a macro if you need to manipulate symbols lists. Cool. Try moving square brackets inside of parens to construct a table. Square brackets inside of parens. Menacing Mecha says keyword syntax turns into strings, useful for one-word strings. Yeah. Yeah, so that you don't have to type in quotation marks on both sides. Okay. So there's a plain print also. So if I were to, let's see if I can go and redefine that foo. So fn foo x print. Can I do anything fancy with print? Maybe I can do multiple parameters. The value of x is x. And then I'll return x. The REPL is not playing nice. Okay, so now we're gonna run foo 22. The value of x is 22. There's a lot of extra spacing here. That's kind of weird. But it is working pretty well as a REPL at the moment. Gun says, yuck, this pointy stuff. Judy says, Lua modules return what would be exported, returning a table of functions that can be accessed by storing the return value, like local A equals require. Okay, cool. Yeah, that sort of reminds me of JavaScript a little bit. Chris says, you can change max width of the layout in dev tools to make it wider. Okay, interesting. All right. We're just going to take a little tour of some of the language features real quick. Maybe I should use Fennel mode, because it would be a bit better if we can have a real REPL integration, and I can do this in a buffer and not be typing directly in the REPL. Fennel REPL. The problem, though... Fennel program. Okay, command to run the REPL. We're gonna have to change this. All right, so I want to read link which Fennel. Whoops. Which Fennel. Okay, that's good enough, right? Is that a script though? No, let's not do that. So I'm gonna set q Fennel. I cannot type Fennel today. Program. Okay, this is not what you should do, but I'm just doing it because I have this set up in a Geek shell. Fennel REPL. Here we are. So we got it running in a buffer instead, which is gonna make things a whole hell of a lot easier. Okay. Just for fun, let's see. Code Fennel experiment main.fnl. I think the FNL is the thing for that. fn. Yeah, okay, looks good. So fun foo x print the value of x is. There must be a format string thing that I can use for that too. Now, Fennel eval, Fennel proto REPL eval defun, send the previous S expression to the Fennel REPL process. Does it know which process it is? Fennel eval. I don't know what Fennel proto is though. Start a new one? Sure. Fennel proto REPL. Oh, I haven't saved the file yet, which means the directory does not exist. Okay, let's try that again. All right, it looks like it started a REPL. So if I were to type foo4, okay, cool. So we do actually have the ability to run a REPL fairly easily from Emacs. I only had to set the value of the Fennel program variable correctly so that it knows the path to where Fennel is installed. This only really matters if you download Fennel, put it in a weird place, or if you have Geeks and you have it in a separate profile from your main home profile or user profile. Okay, let's see. String.format, but I think the Fennel version is FMT. Cool. That was from Raycat Whodat. I'm getting Happy New Year's from Data Monoid and Ashraz. Happy New Year, everyone. I'm happy that it's a new year. A new fresh start to make a lot of mistakes and look forward to the next year. Uh-oh. Raycat Whodat says, nope, I lied about that. So we'll get to formatting in a minute. Table.concat. Okay, interesting. Like other Lisps, Fennel uses semicolons for comments. Okay, that's great. You can also do, oh, what is this? Functions defined with fn or fast, they have no runtime overhead. However, they do not have arity checking, which means they don't check how many parameters are being passed in. Calling a function with the wrong number of arguments does not cause an error. Yeah, so that is probably something you want to do with your internal functions in your Fennel code. If you have public functions that need to be used by other modules, maybe you want to use the lambda, which adds a bit of extra overhead, probably for all the parameter checking in the function definition. Ensures you will at least get as many arguments as you define, unless you signify that one may be omitted by beginning its name with a question mark. But this seems a little wacky to me. Why would you allow optional parameters in the middle of a parameter list? That's pretty weird. Oh, okay. So you actually have to say it's nil. Fine. Salute, he says, proto-REPL is the more advanced REPL. Cool. You can close the REPL and work with it like Emacs Lisp, Control X, Control E to evaluate forms. Can you? Did it work? Whoops, no, I didn't type the whole. Okay, cool, it does work, great. Lambdas are anonymous. Yeah, well, in other languages they are apparently, but here you're using lambda as a more robust function definition syntax, which I'm not 100% on board with, because my immediate first thought is that lambda is an anonymous function that is in line, but apparently you're defining a function with a name here. So not super happy about that, but that's okay. I can get over it. Judy says, so it's nullable, or rather nillable. Does that mean passing nil? Yeah, apparently so. Locals and variables. Locals are introduced using let with the names and values wrapped in a single set of square brackets. So pretty similar to Lisps, except for the square bracket case. Saluti says, yeah, the name of that lambda macro is a mistake. Yeah, it should be define. I would call it define or defin. Defin makes more sense. Chris says, what if you just don't put a name? It might work. Let's find out. If I were to call, I bet I can't do inline evaluation Oh, Menacing Mega says, weirdly, there are also anonymous FN and lambdas. Huh. Okay, so that's an optional thing. Let's see. Can I do this? That would be pretty interesting. It's very scheme-like if you can do this. FNX. Let's do x plus 1. And then 2. And evaluate that. Return. Oops. I didn't finish it. Ooh. Okay, so in function XP call, attempt to perform arithmetic on a nil value, local X. I screwed that up. Okay, so it gives me 3 in the echo area. So it does actually evaluate that correctly. This is an anonymous function that I'm putting in call position, and it works. Wonder if lambda does the same. Lambda, I can do the question mark X thing. Okay, so compile error, unknown identifier X. Interesting. That works though. You can't do the question mark thing. Did I do that wrong? Who knows? At any rate, it does work. Dave says, so the square brackets are not just a style preference, you have to use them? Yeah, kind of like Clojure, I guess. Oh, really? You have to reference it as question mark X? You know, that's not terrible, because at least it indicates to you, the reader, that that is nil. It could possibly be nil. So I'm kind of on board with that. You know, more clarity is good. Menacing Mecha says, if I recall, in some parts they're style, but in other they're mandatory, like defining tables. Okay. Well, that's a good question. We could give that a shot. Let me do a little let here. Where is the let? Okay, yeah, it's a little bit different than scheme because you don't have your own like sub pairs to do the binding definitions. So x5 foo x. So compile error, expected binding sequence. I think it doesn't like the parens here. Let me make sure. Yeah, so you have to use, you have to use square brackets, apparently. Summer says, I love these programming streams. I learned just enough programming to become an absolute menace to any system I touch, but not enough to do good. Well, you know, that's the starting point. If you become an absolute menace, then you break enough things that you have to learn how to fix them. Okay. So far, I mean, it's kind of a clean syntax. Looks pretty good. Treeblaw says it used to be allowed in let, if I recall, but they removed parents for that since it was confusing. Parens for that. Yeah, I believe that the more flexibility you give in terms of syntax, the more difficult it is to have good standard patterns for the language or standard style for the language. Because then you have people who argue over whether you should use parens or square brackets there. So better just to have one way to do it. Ashra says, that's how you get into quality assurance as senior tester. In other words, mayhem architect. Well, that sounds like a pretty cool job. Judy says, isn't that what we all do? Yes, it is what we all do. Saluti says, let also supports destructuring, as do function parameter lists. That's one of the more useful features of Clojure and how Clojure bindings work. Both in functions and in let expressions, is that you can do destructuring of values that are coming in. So like if you're being given a list or a table, you can specifically extract things in different positions inside of that list, or maybe specific keys of the object that's being passed in. So it's something that Scheme doesn't have until you start using like the match macro or syntax, which is not in Scheme by default. It's surfy. So you have to pull that in as a library effectively. But it seems that Fennel has destructuring by default, which is good. Yeah, match let and etc. in Guile that Dave says. Yes, exactly. Match let or match lambda or match, etc., etc. Honestly, I mean, you can write a lot of Scheme code without match, and I have. I've written a lot of really manual code, pulling apart const pairs and lists, etc. But once you start using match, you kind of wish that match was just like a core part of the language because it's so flexible and useful that it's kind of ridiculous. Dave says, pattern matching in the core standard might become a thing in R7 RS large. Yeah, I hope so. I don't know why it shouldn't be in small though. Like, it's kind of a Swiss Army knife in a way, and removes a lot of boilerplate. So I feel like it's useful. Small is done. Okay, yeah, you got a point. Okay, so R8 RS. We're gonna be knocking down the doors, trying to get match in the small spec, or maybe we'll go back to having a single spec again and not having the large spec. Who knows? Are we gonna like turn the corner and start arguing about splitting up the specs again? R7.1 RS, yeah. Judy, I think you're gonna cause another row in the community, the scheme community. So Luakit says, one thing is match or case, and another is to have it available everywhere. Yes. Yeah, having it just be sort of baked in where you don't have to even call a separate syntax or macro to do it is pretty nice. R8 RS medium. Summer Emacs says R9 RS venti. Yeah, let's go with the latte size chart. Ashra says, can I have my R8 RS rare, please? Judy says, if you ever need bad ideas, let me know. Trust me, I can come up with plenty of my own, but I like your ideas so far. Okay. So you can do inline, anonymous function, function stored as local variables. That's cool. You know, just general higher order function stuff. Also, can you do capture? I wonder if this is like a let rec. Well, let's find out, eh? So x5 y is x1 y. Okay, so it does allow you. I'm guessing that Lua probably is the one that, well, I don't know. It depends on how this gets translated. Let's see. Is there a command for view compilation? Sweet. Compile the current buffer contents and view the output. Let's take a look at that. I'm curious. What? Okay. Well, let's just do it in the REPL then. Let's go down here. What is it? Oh, sweet. I just pressed comma and it gave me the list of commands. That's a nice package. Okay. All right. So that makes sense. I mean, you're literally just writing out the local definitions. X equals 5, y equals x plus 1. So of course that's going to work. But can you do mutually recursive things? Maybe you don't need to do that very often, but in Scheme, it's kind of a common pattern. You have mutually recursive functions that you're defining together in a let binding. I know I'm kind of going like way out of scope of, you know, just using this for a scripting language, but, you know, as a Scheme user and abuser, I'm kind of curious about these things. Locals set this way cannot be given new values. Oh, that's cool. But you can introduce new locals that shadow the outer names. Okay, so that's interesting, actually. So you can't actually mutate locals unless you rebind them. You can also introduce locals with local. Okay, so that's kind of like a defined syntax inline. Use across the whole file. General let is preferred, of course. Summer asks, is Fennel in my path? No, it's not in my path because I've just installed it in a Geeks profile. So it's not in my whole system. Judy says, probably doesn't do tail call. Yeah, I'm sure it doesn't. Unless it has a trampoline or something. I'm guessing that they're not worried about that, though. Let's see, Fennel, tail call. Oh, okay. So there is a way to... the tail exclamation form asserts that the argument is called in tail position. Where is that being used here? I don't see it. Oh. You can use this when using tail calls to recurse over large data sets. If that way, if the code is changed so the recursive call is no longer a tail call, it will cause a compile error. Okay. Giving a name is optional. First is preferred mostly for indentation reasons, but also because it allows recursion. Like Lua, functions in Fennel support tail call optimization. Lua supports tail call optimization? That's pretty sweet. Allowing, among other things, functions to recurse indefinitely without overflowing the stack, provided the call is in a tail position. Well, that's pretty dope. Saluti says Lua does proper tail calls. I love that. I love me some recursive algorithms. Okay. Where were we? Yeah. Let rec. And they mentioned recursive calls. Okay. Let's see. I need to move on a little bit here. Gunn says, I wonder why the geeks don't use the scheme cell SCSH. I don't know. I mean, I don't really use a shell very much at all, so it doesn't really matter to me. Hey, Steven. Nice to see you. Happy New Year. Okay. Numbers and strings, not super interesting. ... Strings are essentially immutable byte arrays. UTF-8 support is provided with the UTF-8 table in Lua. Strings are concatenated with ... Okay, so that's a concatenation. Saluti says var is like local but mutable. Thanks, that's good to know. Tables, let's take a look at this. In Lua, and thus in Fennel, tables are the only data structure. So you don't have things like record types or structs, etc. You just have tables, which is like Clojure too, because you're passing around, what do they call them? Dictionaries or maps? They call them maps? Clojure maps. Hashed collections. Yeah. Association of keys to values to represent domain application data. First case is often referred to as dictionaries or hash maps. Okay, so Clojure has a concept of map or a data structure called map, and Fennel has basically the same thing. So if you want to have like key to value bindings like A1, B2, C3, then you can do that. You can see that when you evaluate that, it actually turns it into the alternative syntax, which is more like what Clojure has, which is the colon for the keyword, which is a convenient syntax to have. That's cool. You can use dot to get values out of tables. So if we were to expand on that, I could say dot A, colon A, I think. Is that right? Table key. Okay, I got to put the key afterward. So colon A, and that will give me 1. Okay, cool. Saluti says, Lua tables are both arrays and maps, FYI. So it's basically like a plist. Let's see. Yes. Oh, 1, 2, 3, and A1, B1, C1. Raycat says, Lua tables are pretty sweet once you get used to them. I mean, it sounds pretty useful. I got LDoc hints while editing in the REPL. Oh, for like dot. Look up key 1 and key. Yeah, it's a good package. Having a good Emacs package for Fennel makes it much easier to get started using this. I'm kind of like, I'm liking it. Saluti says, not like plist really, constant time access. Well, that's cool. I mean, you don't have to like loop over it basically. Both for array and dictionary part. Is it literally the same thing? An associative array is just a map that it just has the indices mapping to the values of those indices. Uninstalled Brain says, curious to hear your thoughts on Clojure. It's a very elegant language. A lot of cool stuff's been written with it. I don't like the Java runtime so much, so that's sort of the reason why I avoid it, which is a really dumb reason to avoid something. But I also just kind of like, I'm kind of obsessed with Scheme, so I don't really spend any time with Clojure. Dave says, overloading a hash table for both arrays and maps is a little weird to me. It seems inefficient from a memory perspective and possibly even from a runtime perspective. But maybe it's more inefficient from a memory perspective. Chris says, that's when we have ClojureScript. Yeah, true. I've used a lot of ClojureScript. The fact that it uses the Google Clojure, which is a different thing, compiler, results in some very ridiculous looking JavaScript code. So that's the thing I don't really like too much about ClojureScript. I would prefer something that's a little bit more straightforward output. Kind of like what Fennel does with Lua. Ashra says, I wonder why there's no L sharp yet. Lisp that targets .NET stuff. There is. There is a Clojure for .NET. I forgot what it was called. Clojure CLR. I don't know if that's even being developed anymore. Let's see. Yeah, 2023. Okay, I mean, it's fairly recent. Also, there was Iron Scheme. I don't know if that even gets updated anymore. Okay, 2023. So there's a Scheme implementation for .NET. So there are Lisps for .NET for sure. There's probably others too. I've also started writing one in the past, but I never went too far with it. Redacted says, Clojure is useful if you need Java libraries, but IMO, it feels kind of heavy and clunky. Clojure, the language, is very nice, but yeah, having to depend on the Java ecosystem sucks. LineEngine definitely made things a lot easier for Clojure. At least, you know, installing dependencies without having to deal with like Maven and all that stuff. I mean, you still have to sort of deal with Maven, but... Okay, so let's see. Let's get on with it. Tables, we looked into indexing a table, sequential tables. Yeah, okay, so this is what Salutis was saying. If you have an array syntax, it effectively turns that into a map or a table with the indices as the keys. Yes, LineEngine is also technomancy. So the person I mentioned earlier in the stream who works with and contributes to Fennel, Phil Hagelberg, also known as Technomancy, was the author of LineEngine for Clojure, which is a very widely used tool. Maybe, I don't know if he created it originally or if he maintained it, but maybe he created it. Saluti says, the cool thing in Lua and also in Fennel is that everything is a table, including modules, which are just maps from strings to functions. Thus, one can wrap all library functions in a simple loop. Yeah, I do see the power of that. I mean, if you really boil a lot of the stuff in the language down to some core data structures and patterns, then you get a lot more mileage out of things like macros. Uh-oh. My screen lock just turned on the streaming machine. There we go. Technomancy is a person. Yes. Technomancy is a person. Okay, inserting things into tables. Yeah, we don't care too much about that. Iteration. Let's take a look at what that looks like. Looping over table elements is done with each and an iterator like pairs. Okay, so you have the each form, you have key value, and then pairs. It's an iterator for general tables or iPairs for sequential tables. That's kind of weird. Why would you even need that? Maybe it's because that's needed to translate into the proper Lua code without there being some extra layer in between. What is it going to say? Okay. Ashra says, is your stream machine still loading or is the battery at 98%? Let's see. What does it say? I'm pretty sure it's at 100. It says 99%, but it has stayed there, which is good. Redacted says, I misunderstood the claim that LineEngine is technomancy. Yes. Saluti says, no, pairs and iPairs are Lua functions. Great. Okay, that does make sense then. They're not required by Fennel. Cool. All right, so there's also, each digits string.g match. You can use any Lua iterator. So Lua has a concept of iterators. Oh, closures. Any construction that allows you to iterate over the elements of a collection. We represent iterators by functions. Each time we call that function, it returns a next, which obviously implies that they have closures because you need to store the state for the next call inside of the function that's being returned. Any iterator needs to keep some state between successive calls. Closures provide an excellent mechanism for that task, yada, yada. So you have to initialize it somehow. Do you give it the, okay, so list iter t, I equals 0, table gen. Okay, so t is like the collection and then you return a function that iterates over that collection. Makes sense? Right, so let's go back to this. So any of these functions like pairs, iPairs, I'm guessing they're just returning the key value pairs as a another associative array, I'm guessing. Probably. An array of arrays, and then each key value gets bound from that array. And then this digits is just the single values that are in this list. So I'm guessing this is probably like a destructuring bind right here. You could probably put other things in there as well. No, Summer, I did not get a MacBook. In fact, I have an old MacBook and the battery there is broken, so it's not going to do much better for me. Looping, there's while loops, cool. Conditionals, let's see. Can also be used as cond for multiple conditions compiling into else-if branches. Okay, so if allows multiple branches, it sounds like. With an odd number of arguments, the final clause is interpreted as else. Okay, gotcha. So this is a very, yeah, okay, gotcha. So basically, the first expression is the if check, and then the consequent, I guess you call that, the what is it, the predicate and the consequent. Is that the formal syntax or formal definitions for those names? And then you got another pair of those, and then the else down here. So apparently you can have as many as you want. What's going on here? They have a when macro style thing. Cool. Tables. Table has a string of keys like this. You can pull values out of it easily with a dot. Okay, so you can index values out of an object, keys out of an object using the dot syntax, which is not very Lispy, but it is very convenient. So that's fine. Saluti says, iPairs and pairs are iterators for tables, so they're some of the most frequently used functions in Lua. That I would guess that's the case. Saluti says, iPairs and pairs return multiple values, index value in order and key value, respectively. So what does that look like? Lua multiple value return, because Scheme has that too. Lua is one of the few languages that is able to return more than one value. I'm looking for the real documentation, but I'll take this. Can you show me an example without me having to like dig for it? Okay, cool. So just like a comma. Yeah, that's fine. So one value, comma, some other value, then it's multiple return values, and then you can destructure that using comma whenever you call a function. Cool. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. And that was in reference to what Salutis was saying about pairs and iPairs. They return multiple values. That's why that each syntax works that we saw before. Error handling. Errors in Lua have two forms they can take. Functions in Lua can return any number of values, and most functions which fail will indicate failure by using two return values, nil followed by a failure message string. You can interact with this style of function in Fennel by destructuring with parens on instead of square brackets. Let's see, where is the call for that? Case io.open file. Oh, that's kind of neat. When io.open succeeds, it will return a file, but if it fails, it will return nil and an error message string describing why. Kind of weird though, because what this is implying is that one path of io.open returns a single value, which this case is able to check, and another path returns two values, a nil and the error message, which is fine, but somehow you have to be able to look at the return value of a function to see whether it is a single value or multiple values. So there must be a type for that you can inspect. And that's why case should work. I'm guessing that's the case. You can write your own functions which return multiple values with values. Okay, it's pretty much like scheme. Cool. While errors are the most common reasons to return multiple values from a function, it can be used in other cases as well. This is the most complex thing about Lua, and a full discussion is out of scope, but it's covered well elsewhere. I'm guessing this is Lua docs. Ah, someone's blog post. Okay. Values are used pretty commonly in Scheme, I think. I mean, it's a pretty common issue. Like, you want to return multiple things from a function without having to define a record type to encapsulate that information. Dave says, love multiple return values. I still have trouble working with them sometimes because I don't really know like the best patterns. Guile has multiple ways to use multiple return values. There's like let values and some other things for that as well. And I'm not sure, not ever sure which one is the idiomatic way to do it because the Guile manual isn't very clear on it. Dave says, returning more than one thing without having to allocate. Nice. Yeah, if you don't have to actually have a data structure for that, it's pretty good. Let's see. Judy says, unpacking them can be a bit annoying. Yeah, I've run into that too. Let's see. Does not compose well. The error status must be propagated all the way along the call chain from inner to outer. That's what monads are for. To address this, you can use error. This will terminate the whole process. Okay, so like an exception. Let values, call with values, define values all have their place. Yeah, for sure. All right. So let's move a little bit more. Variadic functions, any number of arguments like in many languages. Sure, not too important. Strict global checking. If you get an error that says unknown global in strict mode, it means you're trying to compile code that uses a global which the Fennel compiler does not know about. Most of the time it's due to a coding mistake. Yeah, we don't need to get into that, but that does make sense. Okay, so there's some gotchas here, some things that are a little bit different than what people who know Lisps are used to. Arithmetic, comparison, and Boolean operators are not first-class functions. They can behave in surprising ways with multiple return-valued functions because a number of arguments to them must be known at compile time. Interesting. So I suppose what they're saying is that someone would expect a function that returns multiple values to just pass through directly to one of these operators, and it won't work. There is no apply function, which is pretty commonly used in Scheme. Also sort of like fun call, I guess, in Common Lisp. Instead, use table.unpack or unpack depending on your Lua version. That's kind of weird. Oh, I see. So you're basically like splatting or spreading an array of parameters into the function call. So apply is typically used when you have a list of parameters, or where you have the parameters to a function stored as a list, and you want to invoke a function with that list of parameters passed into the appropriate positions of the parameter list. You can't do that. There's no apply in Lua or Fennel, but you can use this weird unpack thing to basically say, hey, insert whatever's in this list into the parameter list. Can you use an arbitrary variable for that? Tables are compared for equality by identity, not based on the value of their contents. Okay, it's reference comparison and not value comparison, which makes sense. There's probably a special function for doing stuff like that. It also probably does deep compare, which you're not going to get in a lot of cases with a straight equality comparison. Saluti says, yes, table.unpack takes a table and converts it into multiple return values, and that works as splatting. Cool. Makes sense. Lua programmers should note Fennel functions cannot do early returns. Yes, it's because Lisp is expression-based, and you should just design your functions to have a single return value based on what the logic is. which is not very hard. Built-in functions in Lua standard library like math.random above can be called with no fuss and no overhead. Can I just call that math.random? Boom. All right, that's sweet. I'm guessing numbers are all doubles by default. What is the equality check? 1.0? Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Built-in functions like Lewis. Oh yeah, I read that. Coroutines, which are often implemented with special syntax in other languages. Coroutines let you express non-blocking operations without callbacks. Okay. itch.io and coroutines. Oh, okay, that's Leaf, the creator of itch. Is this in? Okay, yeah, gotcha. Summer says, doing basic math with eLisp seems simpler. It's basically going to be the same, though. I mean, plus 1, 2, it's the same, effective same syntax. Dave says, itch's architecture is very neat. Yeah, I haven't really looked into it too much. I know that Faster Than Lime, who is kind of, done a lot of stuff in the Rust community recently, used to work at itch and wrote a lot of Go code there. And that's where I think he learned to hate Go. If you read any of his blog posts about it. Salute says, numbers are floating point numbers, but there exists integers as their subtype. Yeah, similar to the numeric tower and scheme or common Lisp. I'm starting to feel more and more like Lua is just like a kind of scheme, which makes me happy. Hey, Glenn, nice to see you. Ashra says, the honeymoon is over was an excellent blog post. Yeah. All right. Yeah, that Go definitely has that like multiple return value error style, which causes, headaches. Why is it scrolling so slowly? Oh, what was that? Modules and multiple files. That's useful. You can use require function to load code from other files. You can say require :loom for a library called loom. Let's see, loom.map. So yeah, it basically becomes a namespace for that module. You can call functions straight out of it. There's simply tables which contain functions with other values. The last value in Fennel file would be used as a value for the whole module. The last value in a Fennel file will be used as the value of the whole module. Technically, this can be any value, not just a table, but using a table is the most common for good reason. Okay, that explains why we saw what we saw before when I decompiled that let function. Where was that? Is it still in here? Does it save that? It doesn't seem to have saved it. Compile. Let's go back to the echo area, paste that in. Yeah. Yeah, okay. It must have ripped it out of here, but when I was in vterm and I asked it to do that, let me run Fennel and compile. I'll just insert that form. Unknown identifier foo. Oh, okay. That makes sense. That's cool, though. Like, it caught the fact that I haven't actually defined foo yet, which is ideal. Let me just take that out just for the sake of example. Okay. Local y equals x plus 1 return y. Yeah, okay. Wasn't exactly what I had in mind. We saw something before like that, and it made me think maybe that's why it did that. Proto. There we go. Okay, so to require a module that's in a subdirectory, take the file name, replace the slashes with dots, and remove the extension, and pass that to require. So basically, it follows file paths. If you have that in your local file path, then you can just do lib.ui.menu. That's fine. You can call require to load Fennel or Lua modules, but in other contexts, it will not know about Fennel modules. You need to install the searcher that knows how to find .fnl files. Okay. Relative require. What about load path? Or Fennel's search path, stored in Fennel.path, which is distinct from package.path. Use it. Okay, so there's a variable called Fennel.path. Let's check that out. Fennel.path. Okay. I need to require Fennel probably. So let's do that. Local Fennel require Fennel. Can I do that? There it is. Interesting. I'm guessing this is like a search syntax saying that anything under the current directory, any file.fennel, FNL is will be found, and anything subdirectory with an init.fnl will be found. That sort of makes sense. Saluti says, Technomancy, the maintainer of Fennel, told me once in a discussion that introducing multiple values into Lua was the biggest mistake, given that tables are as practical, if not more, as multiple values. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if your VM can understand values and handle it in a way that doesn't require allocations or separate data structures, then it's better, I think. I think that's what Dave's saying. All right. So cool. That was the tutorial. We made it through the tutorial. Requiring modules from modules other than init.fnl. Yeah, we don't care too much about that. So we've got 30 minutes left effectively. Let's see what we can do here. There's a reference that gives you all the built-in forms. We can scan that real quick. Okay, so, oh, partial application, that's cool. Binding, let scoped locals, case pattern matching, match pattern matching. They have match also, that's cool. Why can't I click on a link and go to it? There it goes. I think my browser's acting really slow. Symbols in the patterns are always pinned with outer scope symbols if they exist. Okay. Case try, declare local variable, set local variable or variable field. With open. That's kind of like in Scheme. Maybe Common Lisp has something like that too. But you can open a file and then it will handle closing it after execution completes, even if there's an error, I'm guessing. Yeah. Flow control, each, normal for loop, operators, dot table, nil safe table. Okay, that's cool. Nil safe table, what does it do? Throw an error? Oh, okay, it just returns nil. Gotcha. Iterators, accumulate, is that like a fold? Yeah, similar to fold and reduce, commonly used in functional programming languages. Good to know, it has some higher order programming. Is it called accumulate in Clojure? Whoops, accumulate. Accumulate. No, it's called reduce in Clojure. So why call it accumulate then? Just call it reduce. F collect, values, jeez. Colon does a method call. Looks up a function in a table and calls it with the table as its first argument. Is there special syntax so that it can complain if the thing that you're trying to call is not a function? You can also use an alternative syntax, colon F method name with parameter. Okay, so it's sort of like some dynamic reflection. Ooh, threading macros, love that. Gotta love threading macros. Due to, where you can sort of string together calls on an object. That's cool. Tail, yeah, we saw that before. Include, loads Fennel Lua code at compile time and embeds it into the, okay, so it's like literally including it. That's fine. Macros. Import macros. Yeah, you need that for compile time import. We haven't looked at macro definitions yet. I don't know if we're going to have time to do that. Define several macros. My max. So yeah, basically backtick syntax, and they're using the hash character as the slot. Or maybe they're... Whatever is in X gets dumped in here. No, that's not right. That's a bind. They're making a special... I wonder if hash is like a gensim. Is it like a special gensim? Or is it just a symbol name? Maybe I'm overthinking this. So we're putting the value of X here into the backtick. Macro, define a single macro. Macro debug will expand the macro so you can see what the output is. Cool. Accidentally evaluate their arguments more than once. Yeah, that's the whole hygiene problem. You may not bind a bare symbol inside a backtick as an identifier. Appending a hash. Okay, so it is an automatic gensim. Cool. Ensures the local name is unique. I guess the first time it shows up, it does a gensim and then replaces that same thing every time through. Salute says, yes, the hash is a special gensim. It's a great improvement. Yeah, that definitely is better than having to call gensim and bind them with lets and stuff. You know, I'm kind of loving this. Let's see, compiler environment, inside eval compiler, blah, 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 blah. Functions listed below are visible to your code. So when you're writing a macro, you can use these functions. That's something that people don't really realize whenever you're dealing with macros in Lisp languages, because the macro is being expanded at compile time, the functions that you define and many of the library functions you use are not accessible. So this is why you need things like include macros. Include, what was it? Oh, import macros, load macros from a separate module. I wonder if that even, well, okay, probably not. Is that it? Lua escape hatch. Let's take a look at that real quick. So if you want to embed direct Lua into your code, you can call Lua and then just a regular string and just spit it out, which probably isn't needed in most cases, but if you really do need it, then there it is. All right, anyway, that is basically the special forms of the language, but as we've said before, there's no special runtime for any of this stuff. The compiler for Fennel turns that into Lua on the other side, so effectively no overhead. All right, let's take a look at... Salute says import macros is really cool. All functions in a macro module operate on forms. Okay. Configuring AwesomeWM with Fennel. Use Fennel to write the AwesomeWM config by Christoph Frick. Fetch a recent Fennel version. And let's see, recent Fennel version, whatever you want to use, fun.fnl. What's that? What? Oh, it's a functional programming library for Lua designed with Luakit in mind. That's cool. 50 programming primitives typically found in languages like ML, blah, blah, blah. Okay, map, filter, reduce. I'm not logged in. I can't star that. Anyway. Okay, so if you have the Fennel script local, you can load it in. Add the path to your config relative to your home directory. Do you need Lua fun? I guess he just uses it for fun. Okay. And this is an example of a awesome configuration script. Maybe I'll just link to this we may not have time to try this, just to take a look at the way the code looks as a configuration. So there's some locals being defined here, which not sure how I'm feeling about it, but it's importing some modules. I'm guessing a lot of this stuff is normal Lua modules. A macro being defined with selected tag. to turn that into another form. Focus colors. Yeah, so some of this stuff is probably what Awesome is looking for. I see. So it's looping over focus colors, maybe. Focus colors. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. So there is a lot of code being written here to control the Awesome WM environment, which is good because it shows that you can use actual Fennel Lisp code for doing all this stuff. And it looks fairly Lispy. I mean, some of it's not so great. The function definitions all definitely look right, like I would expect. And I'm guessing that if you have, well, no. I wonder if the Fennel REPL can connect to a running process. Switch to REPL, probably not. Let's see, Fennel Emacs connect to REPL. Well, let's just take a look at Fennel mode, eh? .2023, is that the latest commit? Maybe not. The GitHub mirror is out of date a little bit. No issues. I saw it on Codeberg also. Right here. Are there any issues? No. Okay. I think there's 3 different places where the code is and they're not up to date. It's like a org export backend. Org Babel functions for Fennel evaluation. That's cool. Anti-Fennel. Turn Lua code into Fennel. Okay. So just take a snippet of Lua code and I mean, it's because the translation is so one-to-one from Fennel to Lua, going the opposite direction also probably isn't that hard so long as you don't write Lua code with features that Fennel doesn't use. All right. Can I look here and see if there's like a connect? Okay, that's creating the process, starting the server. What the hell? Okay, I'm guessing it could only be a managed process. AwesomeWM Lua REPL. Live REPL like Lua for Awesome. Emacs REPL for interacting with AwesomeWM. Oh, well, here you go. And it's by ShitWizard. That's cool. Interact with your running AwesomeWM session from inside Emacs using Fennel, a Lua-based Lisp. You know, I bet money. Eval Lua. It's probably like a command line tool. That you can just call and eval a script. And then you just compile out the Fennel to a temporary file and then let the current process execute it, I guess. Dbus. Anyway, there is something for that. Let me go to the show notes. I could just drop that in. Configuring awesome Fennel. And then what was the other thing I had? Yeah, the gist that we found. This one. Gun says, fork the Erbsluft window manager. You just want to make me say it, don't you? Okay. So, anything else? Was there anything else I wanted to look at? So my thoughts on Fennel right now is that I think it's really well designed because it keeps things simple and it uses the strengths of Lua to just provide a better syntax for the language, and also make it possible to use a more functional programming style in a way that a Lisp programmer is used to. And it does seem to have some similarities, or Lua itself seems to have some similarities with Scheme in terms of tail call optimization, multiple values, coroutines to some degree. So I feel like you could probably do a lot of interesting stuff with this if you are experienced with Lisp or Scheme or Clojure, because it is more similar to Clojure. But you have to definitely take the design and, I wouldn't call it limitations, but the idioms of Lua into account while writing code with Fennel. I'm kind of curious to try using it for Fennel and Lua, I suppose, for a project just to see how it goes. I don't exactly know what I would do yet. It might be something I would do on the Flux Harmonic channel, like maybe a game jam or something of that nature. Speaking of which, when's the next Ludum Dare? Ashra says Fennel plus Lua plus Love 2D. Yeah, probably that. April. That's a possibility. That's a possibility. Oh, yeah. I probably should have mentioned that. There is an update that I forgot about. I'm going to say this at the very end of the stream where nobody will see it. The Libra Planet conference this year, now that it's 2024, that I'll be keynoting, is that they finally got the date and the location figured out. It's going to be in May. May 4th and 5th at the Wentworth Institute of Technology in Boston. So May 4th and 5th. All right. Dave says, I'll try to be there. Yeah, that'd be awesome if we can meet up. Ashra says, why not start tomorrow via the New Year, New Skills Game Jam? You know, I would love to, but having a 7-month-old baby doesn't make it very easy. Gun says, what is Love? How would you pronounce that, Gun? A cross between a German lion and a seagull? Who knows? All right. So yeah, let him dare, whatever you say, whatever you call it. Ludum Dare. Who knows, man? I always have trouble with this. That would be a possible place I would like to try to use Fennel. I might experiment with it in some other ways as well. Like French. I don't know how to pronounce French words either. I'm very uncultured. Even though I live in Europe, I'm still an American at heart, and we don't know things. All right. Let's see if there's anything else interesting on the Fennel site. We can quickly look at the macro guy. Croissant, Ashra says. Yes, I can maybe pronounce that sort of right, but don't test me on it. Macros are how Lisp accomplish metaprogramming. Sure. Code is data. How to manipulate data. Okay, I mean, it's a pretty good guide to writing macros, it seems. Oh, yeah. Gotcha, yeah, gotcha. Yeah, talking about GenSim. So take the bird I and say love, live, Bird, live. Okay. Not easy. Need some practice. ASD quirks. Okay, not super interesting. Macro modules. Where is it? We use macro to write an inline macro. Great when you only need to use it one file. Macros cannot be exported as part of the module, but the import macros form lets you write a macro module containing macros which can be reused anywhere. Macro module is like any other module, contains function definitions, and ends with a table containing just the functions which are exported. Only difference is that the entire macro module is loaded in the compiler environment. Gotcha. Import macros for, okay, I see. All right, so it's basically like helper functions for macros. This thrice if is only a function. It's not a macro itself, but it can be, it seems it can be treated as a macro. Okay, all right. So condition result, yeah, it's just a function definition called thrice if, excuse me. But it, what? I see. Okay, gotcha. So what is step doing in this case? It's calling itself recursively. Okay, all right, I got it. So it's returning the quoted list, but it's doing it recursively. And the result of this whole thing is that full recursively generated quoted list. And then you're basically defining it as a function, but it gets used as a macro here. And then whatever the function returns as a quoted list gets unrolled into the output. Yeah, so Luakit says thrice if is a macro in this case, yeah. I was just looking at the example and trying to understand like what it was doing because I assumed it was supposed to be treated as a macro, but I wasn't entirely sure. They are not hygienic. You have to use gensims, but they have a syntax where if you have a symbol name with a hash mark at the end of it, it automatically gensims it in the local context. Yeah, manual, basically half auto gensim, but it is gensim. And there is a gensim function that you can call if you have to, if you need a little bit more control. Fn in a macro module is like macro in normal code. Yes, gensim is better than nothing, but it does require you to be on your toes and make sure you do it correctly. Otherwise, you do end up with capture problems, etc. All right. But don't go overboard. Well, yeah, of course not. API listing explains how to embed Fennel into a Lua program. Start a configurable REPL. Ah, okay, you can start a REPL in your program, it seems. Provides the following functions for use when embedding Fennel in a Lua program. If you're writing a pure Fennel program or working on a system that already has Fennel support, you probably don't need this. Only the Fennel module is part of the public API. Other modules are implementation details subject to change. Okay, here's an eval function. That's cool. You can load a file. Gotcha. Fennel-aware stack traces. Fennel.traceback function works like Lua's debug.traceback function, except it tracks line numbers from Fennel code correctly. So you're basically replacing the inbuilt debug.traceback, which is fine. Some systems print stack traces from C, which would not be affected. Sure. All right, compile a string into Lua, compile an iterator of bytes into a string of Lua, okay. Saluti says, the great thing about hash and Fennel macros is that things that are bound without it, say in let by mistake, become compiler errors. That's nice. That's really something that sets Fennel apart. So bound without it. Gotcha, yep. So if you make a mistake, it tells you pretty fast. Var args, comments, ASTs will not emit comments. However, when the comment field is set in the parser option, comments will be included in the parsed values. They are identified using Fennel.comment and construct using the Fennel comment function. Yeah, that makes sense. With transpiled code, you kind of want to have the comments being carried across, especially if the code is more or less readable, as it is in this case. Work with doc strings and metadata. Uh-oh. I see. So you got some metadata about function definitions, etc. Performance mode. Okay. What does this say? Plugins. Plugin system is extremely experimental and exposes internals of the compiler. Functionality of the compiler to be extended in various ways. When the compiler hits an extension point, it will call each plugin's function for that extension point if provided. That seems a little bit overkill. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's powerful, but macros are supposed to be the way that you extend a Lisp and not some kind of plugin system. But maybe there's value to it. I don't know. Possible use cases including building a type Fennel.view to serialize data with Eden style tagging. Eden is like a data description format in Clojure syntax. Or manipulating external S expression based syntax such as tree sitter queries. Okay. I guess it makes sense. Plugins can also include REPL commands. That's nice. Okay, anyway, Saluti says also in generated code, FYI, Lua line numbers match Fennel line numbers, so if you get a crash in production, it's easy to find the locus as during development. That's nice. So Saluti, it sounds like you have a pretty positive opinion of Fennel as a person who's been using it professionally. I mean, what I'm seeing so far looks pretty solid. So if you are the type of person who would be interested in using Lua and benefiting from the value of Lua because it does have value on its own, and you are a Lisp fan, especially if you have used Clojure before, I think Fennel is a very cool language to check out because it seems to have a lot of value, adds a lot of value on top of Lua, and it gives you a lot of the sort of creature comforts of Lisps, like macros and expression-based syntax, etc. So I'm pretty impressed with it. I think that I'll try to use it in some places and see sort of like how I feel about it as a general hacking language. But as always, I'm pretty partial to schemes, so I'm not really moving too far away from that. All right, I think that's it for today. Hopefully that was useful to those of you who are interested in like an overview of Fennel, the language. I mean, obviously we didn't really get into much writing of code with it, but there's not really much to see, I suppose, other than just looking over what the syntax is because it does compile down to Lua. So if you're interested in seeing more about Lua in the future, certainly let me know in the comments or via the other channels like the Mastodon or IRC. And if there's other Lispy languages that you're interested in me covering on the channel, definitely let me know because I'm interested in checking out other things like this. We did check out Hi, which was the sort of Lisp for Python at some point in the past, which wasn't as well done as this is for sure. It was a little bit weirder, but yeah, everything can't be great. There's others that I have in mind too, but we'll get to those another time probably. So thank you all for being here. Really appreciate your attention, your participation, and hope you all have a great weekend. Until next time, happy hacking. We'll see ya.